Leah ran. She ran as hard as her legs would carry her. Her backpack bounced painfully off her back with each step, its contents threatening to spill out. But she couldn't stop. She had to keep running. She could hear the pack of mongrels behind her, snarling, savage, mutated dogs. The hairless monsters' lean bodies were built to run prey down, and their oversized sharp teeth were perfect for cutting prey to ribbons. A small pack could bring down a Brahmin by working together. Leah would barely be a challenge, especially since she dropped her plasma pistol sometime during her fight. Leah cursed her stupidity as she gasped for air. She ran through the ruins of what must have been once a mid-sized town, but was now overgrown with twisting, mutated trees and other scraggling plant life desperately trying to survive in the soil that still burned with low levels of radiation. Not enough to kill life that trespassed into its domain, but enough to make life itself difficult. Only the strong survived in this world, and Leah was increasingly chastising herself for being foolish enough to enter the wastes in the first place. She wouldn't have to regret those mistakes for long if those dogs caught up to her, though. She vaulted over a low, ruined wall, the lead dog perhaps no more than 50 feet behind her, and tripped over the feet of a sleeping super mutant on the other side. Leah crashed to the floor, her momentum rolling her over in a somersault and bringing her down on top of a second, sleeping super mutant. The massive creature groaned audibly as breath exploded from its lungs due to her impact, the foul stench of it hitting her straight in the face, out of the frying pan and into the fire. She was already scrambling to her feet as 3 super mutants woke from their interrupted naps, confused and growing more irritated by the moment. The one she had tripped over began to rise as he glared at her with hate in his eyes. "Why you wake up, super Rawr!" The mutant howled in pain as one of the mongrels cleared the wall and in its bloodlust bit down on the mutant's calf from behind. A second mongrel joined, going after the other mutant's leg. Working together, they managed to bring the mutant crashing back to the ground. The mutated dogs were as big as a German Shepherd, but they might as well have been poodles in comparison to the 600+ pounds of muscles that was the average super mutant. The other 2 mutants found the situation hilarious. Leah was briefly forgotten, an opportunity she used to start running again. "Stupid dog!" The mutant being assaulted brought its massive fist down on one of the dog's heads, and even well on her way out of the makeshift camp, Leah could still hear the animal's skull crack. The other 3 mongrels were undeterred though, and smelling blood in the air, they pounced on the downed mutant. The 2 laughing mutants only found this even funnier. Leah's presence was completely forgotten by now. There was the sound of yelping and a roar of pain from one of the mutants as Leah ducked through the crumbling ruins. Finally, the sound of fighting stopped, and she could hear the voice of the injured mutant yelling at its comrades. "You as stupid dogs! You let human get away!" There was a loud smacking sound Leah took as the lead mutant punishing one of the other mutants, and then she could hear the beating of large feet as the trio began to chase after her. She was nearing exhaustion. She couldn't keep going. The mutants wouldn't take long to catch her, and when they did, a rough, leathery hand suddenly shot out from behind a wall and grabbed Leah by the shoulder, spinning her around. A second rough, leathery hand clamped over her mouth as she was dragged into a tight recess formed by 2 collapsed walls. It was dark in there, the opening barely big enough for a person, but enough light came in for Leah's eyes to widen as she realized who her savior was. Their skin was the color of burned leather with a similar texture, wrinkled, tough, like old Brahmin hide. There were only a few strands of hair poking out from under an old military cap, and where a nose would be, most of the flesh had rotted away, leaving only a slight impression and 2 empty holes. The lips of the mouth were likewise gone, and 1 ear was missing, leaving only a hole in the side of the head. A ghoul. Leah's panic rose and she struggled even harder. "Stay quiet, stupid girl, unless you want to be super mutant chowder." The hoarse whisper was as cracked and as dry as the ghoul's flesh. Leah relaxed, her initial panic gone. She looked into the ghoul's eyes and saw intelligence there, even a bit of concern. It was impossible to tell, was not a feral. The loud thump of a super mutant clearing the remains of a broken window and landing inside the shattered home they were hiding in was enough to remind Leah of the real danger. The ghoul looked into her eyes once more, their fierce glare making it clear she should stay quiet. The mutant seemed to sniff the air, and in the distance she could hear its 2 other compatriots. "Here, human. I have you. What humans like? You don't know. Human like rocks, I think." "Haha, stupid humans, rocks everywhere. Human, come here, stupid human, I have rocks. This not trick. I have many rocks." Their voices were growing distant, but the super mutant inside the shattered house had grown suspicious as he sniffed the air. Leah felt the ghoul shift and release its hold on her mouth. There was the slightest click as the ghoul slowly brought the laser rifle up. "Human, me know you in here. Me can smell." The mutant never got a chance to finish. The ghoul suddenly popped out of their hidey hole, whirling before its feet even hit the ground and bringing the rifle up. There was a sharp crackling sound as a 1,000-watt beam of energy struck the mutant directly under the chin, burning a hole in its throat. The beam lasted for only 0.2 of a second, and in that time had burned through 6 inches of flesh. The super mutant gargled, attempting to shout, before falling over with a great thud. Clutching its throat, it died shortly after. "Let's go. Quiet." The ghoul didn't wait for Leah and was already making its way out of the house, away from the other super mutant voices still trying to tempt them with various different types of rocks. The running hadn't stopped, merely slowed to a steady jog until Leah felt like her legs had turned to rubber and her lungs would explode. Then, mercifully, the ghoul had finally come to a stop behind an outcropping of fallen masonry, which provided good cover from all angles. The ghoul didn't even seem winded, to Leah's own incredulousness, as she labored to get her own breathing under control. When she could finally speak again, she thanked her savior. "Hey, I wanted to say thank you." The ghoul grunted its acknowledgement, still surveying the terrain around them. "My name's Leah. What's yours?" "What in the hell are you doing out here?" Satisfied that the mutants weren't in pursuit and there was no other danger around, the ghoul finally relaxed. It sat across from Leah, inspecting its laser rifle. "I was following a group. You see, they took someone, kidnapped them, I mean." The ghoul didn't have much of an eyebrow, but it raised what remained of one in an entirely too smug look of surprise. "You were chasing slavers? Alone?" Leah nodded sheepishly. She was aware it was stupid. She'd been told so, yet here she was, almost super mutant dinner. "Ranger settlement?" She nodded again, frantically. "Took a few people, my husband." The ghoul scoffed, then smiled. "Today's your lucky day times 2 then. There's a town nearby, Steelholm. Heard of it?" Leah shook her head. "You must have traveled pretty far then. There's a man there, he can help. He'll want to help. I'll take you to meet him." "Why? No offense, but why would you want to help me? Again?" The ghoul eyed her with suspicion. "Saving your life not good enough to earn your trust?" Leah felt her face redden in shame. "No, it's just…" Then the ghoul laughed. It reminded her of a bad, very dry, racking cough, like the type that people who will die soon make. "Relax, just yanking your chain. I get it, you're suspicious. Got more sense than it seems at first glance. This man, he's got a vested interest in banditry. Raiders, slavers too. Hates the lot of them. Lives for helping out people like you, for his own reasons, of course. I work for him. Pay is good. Getting to drill lasers through bad guys' foreheads? Even better." The ghoul smiled, a truly ghastly sight. Leah blanched. This only made the ghoul laugh again. That dry, raucous, horrible affair. Leah turned beet red once more. "I'm sorry, I've heard of ghouls, I just never…" "Saw one as gorgeous?" The ghoul laughed again. This time Leah gave a bit of a genuine smile. "Sorry, let's start over. My name is Leah, and thank you for saving my life." "Welcome. Name's Nat." "Short for Nathaniel? Natalie?" The ghoul snickered and shook its head. Leah blushed once more. "I'm so sorry. It must be terrible that, you know." She made a sweeping motion of her own body. "People can't tell." The ghoul got serious now, and Leah thought she offended it, but then, unexpectedly, the ghoul smiled. "I don't remember getting sick. It was like being in a long, dark tunnel. Thought I was dying. But then there was a point of light, and it grew, and I woke up. Took a long time after that to come across a mirror." The ghoul was silent for a moment before continuing. "I'd felt the radiation wasting me away. Hair coming out in clumps, flesh sloughing off. But when I found that mirror, I took my clothes off and I stood in front of it and I felt like my real self for the first time, despite being a monster. So don't be sorry." Nat chuckled again. "I'm not offended." Leah nodded slowly. She wasn't sure if she was supposed to feel happy or pity for Nat, but they seemed genuinely content and Leah pushed it away. "I think we lost him. Should we go?" Nat shook their head. "No, better to travel at night. Super mutants hate the night. Their vision's not so good in the dark. Except Nightkin, but there's none in these parts." "What's a Nightkin?" Leah's eyes were wide in a mix of fearful apprehension and curiosity. As they waited for night to fall, Nat told her about the Nightkin, and for months to come as she lay down to sleep, Leah would wish she never asked. It was close to midnight by the time the duo reached the gates of Steelholm. and any exhaustion from the journey melted away as Leah beheld the small fortress town and its formidable entrance gates. What drew her attention immediately, though, was the upper torso of a massive robot sticking out of the ground right in the middle of the thoroughfare into town. It seemed as if the big robot had been separated from its tracks and had its torso buried, with the ability to spin freely and brandish its two arms laden with heavy weapons at any visitors. But Leah didn't mind the massive minigun and rocket launcher brandished in her direction. Her eyes were wide in wonder. Wow, that's a Century Model XA-1 with an upgraded Hellfire missile launcher and a Matador chain gun. Nat gave her a weird look. Sorry. Back home we have a bunch of pre-war books and not much else to read. Leah continued fawning over the heavily armed robot, regardless of Nat's weird looks. Well, its guns don't work, but don't tell anybody. Just there to scare away raiders. Oh, did you check the cogitator link to the omnibus? Or is it a powerhousing issue with the Mecha Condit? Leah's voice trailed off under Nat's odd look. Sorry again. Like I said, we don't have much else to read. Leah loathed leaving the marvelous machine behind. She wished she could take a peek under its hood. Maybe she could even get it working properly again. But Nat dragged her away from her fawning over the half-buried robot. Even as late as it was, Steelhome was surprisingly busy. Several dozen people milled about, clearly enjoying themselves at a number of bars and even a functioning restaurant serving what seemed to be actual Brahmin steaks. Further past this social hub, Steelhome was sprawled up into the mountains that had ringed it, sheltering in its granite embrace. It was a fortress town, probably housing 100, maybe 200 people. Leah knew there were bigger settlements out here in the wastes, but nonetheless, she was impressed. This was the most people she'd ever been around at once, and she felt herself getting a bit overwhelmed when Nat gratefully pulled her into one of the local bars. This one was situated toward the rear of the main road, and when they entered it, it was clear it wasn't the most popular of watering holes. The lighting was dim but electric like the rest of the settlement. Leah guessed the power grid operated off those windmills she'd seen along the sides of the mountain. There were only a handful of tables, and only 2 of them were currently occupied. At the back was a bar, much like any other, staffed by an absolute mountain of a man, who gave her a friendly glance as she entered. Nat gestured toward one of the occupied tables at the center of the room. Seated on the side opposite them was another large man, though not nearly as an imposing figure as the Goliath behind the bar. He was clearly older, wore an old cowboy hat on top of a tangle of long, stringy gray hair. His face was mostly covered by a massive, equally stringy and gray beard, and despite the low light, he wore a pair of small, dark glasses that made it difficult to see his eyes. This is Leah. Found her running from mutants. I think she's in a mess you might be interested in." The man, M, as Nat had referred to him, stood and offered a large friendly smile along with a handshake. He didn't speak, merely bowed his head to her respectfully as he shook her hand. From his grip, it was immediately clear that despite his age and girth, M was still a man of significant strength. M gestured at 2 empty chairs and waited politely for the 2 visitors to sit before retaking his own. Then he simply turned to Nat expectantly. "Turns out she's after raiders. She says they took her husband." M's eyebrow rose in interest, and he turned his gaze to Leah now. Clearly, he expected her to elaborate. They hit us a few days ago. Kinda used to it, we don't have much, and it's never really that violent. We usually just hole up in an old shelter and let them take what they want. But my husband, Alex, he was on his way back from hunting and ran into them. They took him, said he'd fetch a good price at the North Market. M's eyes narrowed behind the dark lenses at the mention of the North Market. There were few people in the entire region who didn't know about the infamous Raider Bazaar. It attracted gangs, tribes, and raiders from the entire northern Great Plains and Rocky Mountains area, as well as their counterparts across the old US border in Canada. Guns, armor, ammo, slaves for working, slaves for eating. They also dealt with legitimate goods, and Leah had heard even pre-war tech. But whoever attended was just as likely to end up part of the merchandise if they weren't heavily armed or let their guard down. M nodded grimly, then turned back to Nat and cocked his head slightly. "Nah, super mutants won't be a problem. Had to take 1 down. But the other 2 were too far to be a threat. I think they were just scavenging." M nodded approvingly. Leah furrowed her brows. Was it telepathy of some sort? No, she hadn't felt anything, and her train of thought was broken by the sound of the doors opening suddenly. A group of 4 men entered and seemed to catch sight of M before turning to huddle amongst themselves near one of the tables. M's eyes never left the group. Leah was about to speak when there was a flurry of activity, chaos abruptly erupting within the small bar. Things happened so fast she'd only piece the events together later when reflecting on the day in bed. One of the men whipped open their long Brahmin hide jacket, pulling a revolver out from his waistband. Nat, who had their back to the group, didn't see the threat. They reacted on pure instinct, throwing a hand up into Leah's chest and pushing her backwards violently, causing her to fall to the floor. Spinning on one foot as they rose up, Nat pulled out their own laser pistol from a holster, already firing as they raised it to center mass on one of the men. But M was faster than all of them. Despite being seated, as if by magic, a revolver appeared in his hand, and he fired upwards through the table, catching the first assailant squarely in the chest. The original Smith & Wesson Model 19 was nearly 400 years old, but the punch of its .357 Magnum round was enough to knock the attacker back and into one of his compatriots. Nat's laser pistol fired as they raised it to center mass, creating a nearly perfect line of cap-sized holes in the man's flesh rising from his left leg up to his sternum. The man croaked as he fell to the ground, the powerful laser boiling blood and flesh 3 inches deep in his body and causing him to drown in his own viscera. M's Model 19 barked out 3 more times, and the third assailant tumbled backwards, a fist-sized hole in his head and 2 more in his chest. The last assailant, the one who had his buddy blown backwards into him, pushed the now corpse forward at the table, blocking any shot M could take. The man brandished his own pistol and raised it to fire when there was a roar that shook the thin scrap and plywood walls of the bar itself. The large man who'd been tending the bar suddenly appeared by the attacker's side, bringing a huge bat down on one of the man's outstretched arms as he lined up his shot. There was the sickening crack of bones splintering, and Leah nearly vomited as she saw the man's arm hanging from the elbow by skin and bits of flesh. The man looked at his nearly amputated arm with shock and horror, but he had only a moment to register it before the bat smashed into his face, turning most of it into flesh pudding. When the corpse hit the ground, several of the teeth broke loose and landed near Leah as she looked on from where she'd fallen. Leah vomited. "Damn it, Orion, we could have used that one alive." Nat kicked the battered corpse angrily. The large man looked sheepish and apologized profusely. As Leah picked herself up off the floor, she could swear she saw the man's eyes watering up in the dim light. "Oh, you puked. It's okay. I did too first time I burned a hole through a man's chest. Or was it a woman? Honestly can't remember. Too long ago." Nat grabbed a bar rag and tossed it at Leah, motioning to some specks of vomit she'd gotten on the front of her shirt. Leah looked down at the mess on the floor and apologized profusely, cleaning herself up best as she could. Orion grabbed a pitcher of water and a fresh bar rag and dabbed gently at her stains. "It's okay, darling. I got a bit of a mess to clean up anyway. Don't worry, you didn't add much to the stink. There, good enough. But when you turn in for the night, leave this shirt out, and I'll launder it in the morning, okay?" Leah nodded, surprised at the sheer tenderness of this mountain-sized man, with a voice as gentle as a mewling calf. If there was anyone who could arm wrestle a super mutant, it must have been Orion, and yet he treated her gentle as a mouse. And while he was near Leah, she confirmed her suspicions. He was on the verge of tears, clearly busying himself so he could rein in his emotion and avoid bursting out crying. But Orion smiled at her once he was done dabbing her shirt and quickly disappeared behind the bar to fetch a mop and a bucket. "It looks like someone didn't take kindly to a previous job." Compared to Orion, M's voice was like the sound of granite being ground to dust under the crushing weight of a million-year-old glacier. "Who do you think it was?" Nat was looking through the bodies for anything that might identify the men or who'd sent them. "Dunno, but damn polite of them to come to us, instead of us having to go out there and find them." M turned his attention to Leah and he bowed his head respectfully at her again. "Ma'am, you don't have to accept our aid, but we're sure as hell offering it. We'd like to get your husband back for you, if you'll allow us." Leah was bewildered. When she set out, she was sure this was a suicide mission, but she still had to try. Now, seeing what these people were capable of, hope flooded her for the first time in a week. Yes, absolutely. I don't have anything to pay you with, but…" Nat scoffed, wiping their hands clean on one of the attackers' discarded jackets. They'd bloodied them in search of their personal effects. Standing, Nat put their hands on their hips. "We'll get ours, don't worry. Not from you. We get looters' rights. Anything whose owners we can't find. And given the Raiders' track records, we rarely ever do. Believe me, it's a good living." For such a terribly sad fact, Nat seemed rather pleased about it. M stuck his hand out in Leah's direction, expectantly. Without hesitation, she shook it. "Who are you guys?" Nat took a seat, oblivious to the corpses and general gore and vomit Orion was now mopping up around them. They took a swig of a half-finished drink some patron had long left behind before answering. "We're the takebacks. We take back what the Raiders and the Wasteland steal. At least when we can. When we can't, we take their lives instead." Leah removed the data slate from her backpack and booted it up. She could hear the vacuum tubes inside the pre-war tech coming to life as the screen slowly powered up with a green glow. The room she'd been given was small, and the walls weren't thick enough to stop the sound of what could only be Nat snoring a room or two over. On the bright side, it came with a window and a clear line of sight to the starry sky above. She opened the small glass pane and leaned the datapad on the windowsill, aiming it up at the sky. Come on, come on. It had taken years to discover the right encryption keys for the handful of pre-war satellites still functioning in orbit above the battered planet. The tech was American, and they tried to make it work with Chinese satellites which had surprisingly survived in larger numbers, but had no luck. If she'd calculated it correctly though, one of the functioning American military satellites should now be overhead, allowing her a brief window of comms. There were whirs and chirps from the data slate, and Leah feared that she'd be overheard, but Nat's snoring was on par with the super mutant. Finally, the screen flashed satisfactorily. Connection established. She thought about what to type, then the slate beeped, and she realized she had one message in her inbox. She hesitated, mulling over the decision to open it or not. Finally, she tapped on the message icon. "The Smith is furious. This is insane. You need to come back. I promise they'll go easy on you given the circumstances. I hope you're still alive and able to read this. Now go watch I Survived 100 Days of Nuclear War, or click this other video instead."